Okay, so today we're going deep on something that's really like a core concept in Java. And it's one of those things that if you really want to level up your Java skills and you're thinking about, moving into that senior software engineer kind of space,
Absolutely.
you really got to have this down pat.
Yeah.
And that is this key word. It's one of those things, that you hear about and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of know what that does.
Right.
But to really deeply understand it and be able to use it effectively and also speak intelligently about it in an interview setting.
Especially in an interview.
Right.
When you're trying to prove that you are ready to be a senior engineer.
Yeah, you don't want to just give some textbook definition of this.
Yeah.
You really want to show that you understand the nuances and the power of this little keyword. So that's our mission today.
It's a small word, but it packs a punch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics. For anyone who might be newer to Java or just needs a refresher, what is this really all about?
Well, at its heart, this is a reference, it's a pointer to the current object. So inside any instance method or any constructor that you're writing in Java, this is like a little arrow that says, hey, this is me.
So it's like the object's way of saying, hey, I'm talking about myself here.
Exactly. It's the object being self-aware.
I like the object is self-aware. And using that self-awareness, what can we actually do with it?
Well, this gives you access to all the members of that object.
Okay.
So you're talking about its fields, its variables, the data that it holds, and also its methods, the actions that it can perform.
Right. So it's like a master key to unlock everything within that object.
It is. And knowing how to use that key is what separates the casual Java user from the seasoned pro.
Okay, and that's what we're here for, to become seasoned pros. So let's jump into some concrete use cases. I know one of the big ones is when you need to distinguish between an instance variable, which is kind of like a core characteristic of an object.
Yeah, the blueprints.
Right, and a local variable, which is just kind of hanging around within a specific method or constructor.
Yeah, just a temporary worker.
Exactly. So how does this help us avoid confusion there?
So let's say you're building an employee class.
Makes sense.
Pretty standard stuff, right?
Yeah.
And of course, your employee has a salary.
Got to get paid.
Exactly. So you have this salary instance variable. Now you want to write a method to give this employee a raise. So maybe call it raise salary.
Okay.
Inside this method, you're going to do some calculations, figure out how much the raise is going to be. Maybe store that in a local variable. Let's call it raise, just to keep things straightforward.
All right, so we have a salary variable that's part of the employee object and a raise variable just within the raise salary method.
Exactly. Now comes the crucial part.
Right.
You need to update the employee's actual salary.
Right.
And this is where this shines. You would write something like double raise, this. Salary by percent 100. So you're calculating the raise amount based on the current salary of the employee. And then you update the salary, this. Salary plus equals raise.
Okay, so this dot salary there is crucial because it's specifically targeting the object's salary, not just that temporary raise variable we created.
Exactly. If you just use salary without the compiler would get confused.
Right. It wouldn't know which salary we're talking about.
It might assume you're talking about the local variable, and then you'd end up with a very unhappy employee who didn't get their raise.
That's a bug we want to avoid.
Definitely. And a good interviewer will be looking for that kind of attention to detail.
Makes sense. So this really helps make our code both correct and super clear, which is what we want, right?
Absolutely. It screams, I know what I'm doing, to any interviewer or anyone reading your code.
Okay, so we've seen how this saves the day when we have naming conflicts between instance variables and local variables. What about constructors? I know there's a way to use this to call one constructor from another within the same class.
Yeah, it's called explicit constructor invocation, and it's a great way to avoid repeating yourself.
I like avoiding repetition. That sounds like efficient coding.
It is. So let's stick with our employee example for a second.
Okay.
You might have a main constructor that takes all the information you need to create a new employee. Their name, their ID, their salary, all the important stuff. But you might also want to offer some simpler constructors for convenience.
Right, like maybe a constructor that only takes the employee's name and sets everything else to some default values.
Exactly. So you could have a constructor that just takes the name, and inside it you call the main constructor using this, and pass in the name along with the default values for the other parameters.
So it's like you're saying, hey, I want to create an employee, but I'm going to use this other constructor to handle the heavy lifting.
Exactly. It keeps your code DRY. Don't repeat yourself.
DRY. I like it. It's like a coding mantra.
It should be. Now, one really important thing to remember about using this in a constructor,
Hit me with it.
it has to be the very first statement in the constructor.
Okay, so no sneaking it in later on.
Nope. The compiler's very strict about this.
So it's like setting the foundation before you start building the rest of the house.
That's a great analogy. And it makes sense logically, right? You need to establish the object's basic state before you start doing anything else with it.
Okay, I'm committing that rule to memory. Now, there's one more use of this that I encountered that kind of threw me for a loop.
Oh, yeah. Let's hear it.
I read that you can actually declare this as a parameter in a method signature.
You can. It's one of those weird quirks of the language.
It just seems so redundant. Like,
Yeah.
why would you need to explicitly pass in the object to its own method?
It's more of a theoretical possibility than a practical technique.
Okay, so not something we're going to be doing on a daily basis.
Definitely not. But it's good to know it exists, especially if you're going for a senior role.
Yeah.
You want to show that you've dug deep into the language.
Right. Impress them with your knowledge of the obscure.
Exactly. But the bottom line is it doesn't really change how the method works or how you call it. It's just a different way of writing it down.
Okay, so more of a curiosity than a best practice.
Precisely. Now, speaking of best practices,
Ah,
let's talk briefly about naming conventions. For instance, variables.
okay.
In some other languages, it's common to use prefixes, like an underscore, to distinguish instance variables from local variables.
Right. So you might see something like salary to indicate that it's an instance variable.
Exactly. But in Java, that's not really the preferred style.
Interesting. So what do Java developers typically do?
We rely on this to make things clear.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
It's like we've been saying all along, this is your friend when it comes to clarity.
It really is. So instead of using underscores or other prefixes, we just use this.salary to make it crystal clear that we're referring to the instance variable.
Okay, I'm liking this more and more. This is like the ultimate disambiguator.
It is. And it keeps your code clean and consistent, which is what we want as senior developers.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up here, can we just distill everything we've talked about into like the top 3 things about this that every aspiring senior Java developer should know?
All right, let's do it. Number 1, this is your direct line to the current object.
Okay.
It's how you access everything inside that object from within its own methods and constructors.
Like a VIP pass.
Exactly. Number 2, this is your best friend when you need to distinguish between instance variables and local variables.
Especially when they have the same name, which happens all the time.
All the time. This saves you from ambiguity and bugs.
This is the bugs layer.
And number 3, this lets you chain constructors together so you can avoid redundancy and keep your code clean.
DRY code is happy code.
It really is. So there you have it. The 3 pillars of this.
Awesome. I feel like we've really demystified this today.
I hope so.
Right.
It's a fundamental concept that can really elevate your Java game.
And for anyone out there listening who's getting ready for a big Java interview,
Right, those senior roles.
yeah, knowing this inside and out is going to give you a huge advantage.
It shows you understand the core principles of the language.
Exactly. So as you continue your prep, I want to leave you with a challenge.
Okay.
Go back and look at some Java code you've written, or maybe some code you've seen online or in a book, and try to spot places where this is being used.
Good idea.
And think about why it's being used there and what would happen if it wasn't there.
Right. Would it still work? Would it be as clear?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that exercise will really help you solidify your understanding of this.
It'll make it less of an abstract concept and more of a practical tool.
Absolutely. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into this keyword in Java.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, keep coding, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.
Until then.
All right, take care.